It's been so long since I did my last proper best and worst. I apologize. I love doing these videos, but they're harder to make than the others. And that has never been more true than right now, because for this video, I had to sit through all 5 live-action Transformers films. And those are the movies we're gonna talk about today. Now first off, spoilers for all of these, just right off the bat. And secondly, I'm only talking about the live-action Transformers stuff here. I'm sure the animated movie and/or movies, not sure if there are multiple, are great and beloved in their own right, but for this, I'm just getting through the Michael Bay live-action films, in honor of Bumblebee coming out soon, I guess. Anyway, normally on this channel I talk about stuff that I generally like. I'm usually not that negative because I don't usually talk about stuff that's that bad, so this will be interesting. Without further ado, let's get into it. So first up, Transformers 2007. I was approximately 5 or 6 years old when this film came out, so yeah, all I remember about this film's release was that those Happy Meals toys were fun to play with. But apparently, people were super excited for this film when it came out, which I can understand, it's a beloved franchise. That being said, I have zero nostalgia for the Transformers, in any respect. Again, besides those Happy Meals toys. I didn't watch any of the animated films, or read any of the comics that probably existed. Before I watched this film, for this video, I only knew about Optimus Prime, Bumblebee, and Megatron. I don't know all about Unicron or Cybertron, you know, all the Transformers lore. So just know that with these reviews, this is coming from someone going into this franchise totally cold. So as far as this movie, just on its own merits, yeah, it's not great. Look, after having sat through all of these, I might go a bit softer on this one, because it's quite a bit better than a lot of these. If not all of them. But when I finished watching initially, I was like, wow, that was still pretty rough. Let's start with what I liked. The voice acting for Optimus Prime and Megatron from Peter Cullen and Hugo Weaving is pretty great. Those voices fit those characters really well, and they're decently iconic. I like the Bumblebee can only talk out the radio thing. I don't know if that's always been the case with this character, but I thought it was a fun dynamic at least in the film. And as far as the human cast, I liked Josh Duhamel. He was somewhat likable. The rest of these we'll get to later. The other thing this movie has going for it is the action, and also the visual effects. CGI-wise, this is pretty spectacular. I can't remember anything looking fake, and back when this film came out, no one had really seen something like this in live action, and this effect was pretty amazing. It's a good concept for a live action film. I know a lot of people complain about the designs. Personally, I don't really have a problem with them, and I don't mean in the fact that it's hard to tell some of them apart. That is a problem, and becomes much worse in the future films. I more mean like Optimus and Bumblebee's design. People always complain they've got too many jagged pieces sticking out of them, or stuff like that. Personally, I think it fits with this world and looks cool. Even though the new Bumblebee design does also look pretty sweet. Action-wise, Michael Bay definitely can do cool action, although sometimes it gets a little too Michael Bay, if you know what I mean. Close-up, shaky cam, explosions, you know the stuff. We'll talk about that more with the others. Here, I feel that this is the Transformers film with the least of that. The action does slip into that kind of close-up, you have no idea what's happening, metal hitting metal stuff, sometimes. But for quite a lot, the action is actually quite good and exciting. There's some very cool slow-mo moments with the Transformers in particular. Also the music, it's nothing super iconic, but it's pretty good. Like, I'd recognize the main theme from this if you played it for me. And finally for the positives, despite all the negative stuff I'm about to say, on the whole, this movie does have a weird charisma to it. Like, despite all the bad stuff in it, I can't really say I was bored watching it. When it's not unironically good or entertaining, most of the time, it's still watchable and somewhat interesting, which I guess could also be called entertaining. And that's what I liked. As you can tell, it's mostly the Transformer stuff, because the Transformer stuff in the Transformer film is actually pretty decent. Where the problem lies is everything else. Namely, cinema's greatest character, played by cinema's finest actor, Sam Witwicky. Alright, I don't hate Shia LaBeouf. In fact, I think he's actually a good actor. Here, I can't really say that his performance is bad, as much as I can say the writing for his character is bad. Because there is bad acting in this film, and I wouldn't say Shia LaBeouf gives a bad performance. It's just his character in these films, and I think this is what surprised me the most about these, is so unlikable. I know a lot of people grew up on these films, this one in particular, and probably have a fond space in their heart for this guy, so I'm sorry I'm about to go after your childhood hero, but I just really didn't like this guy. The worst part about it, in my opinion, is that it seems like the movie is really trying to make Sam like the everyman character that you're supposed to relate to. And frankly, I'm sort of insulted that you think I'd relate to this guy. He's not funny, he's a bit of a dick to the people in his life, he seems like a bit of a creep, and I can't even root for him in the sense that he's like an underdog being bullied. Because when he does get bullied, he's just an unfunny douche about it. I'm obviously not saying anyone deserves to be bullied, but at that point, where it was clear they were trying to make him more sympathetic, I was like, alright, there's really nothing I can latch onto with this character. Some of his stuff with the Transformers, I guess, maybe, but this is the way the film chooses to introduce him. So just from the get-go, I don't like this guy, and I'm not rooting for him to succeed. The movie also takes a hard turn from the opening scene with this awesome Transformer stuff, to Sam sitting in class and the Sam Megan Fox drama and all that. It feels like a totally different movie. A much worse movie, I might add. It's not as interesting or entertaining, and it's not funny to me. I guess I should address that now. Humor is subjective, I know, so if you found this funny, that's great. I'm not being sarcastic, I mean that. If these movies bring you joy and make you laugh, that's awesome. That's the point. This is a personal review though, so for me personally, I didn't find most of this funny. One or two moments did make me chuckle. I will admit, but like 8 out of 10 jokes in this fell totally flat for me. Bumblebee pisses on John Turturro at some point. I just feel like that should be pointed out. Michael Bay can be funny, but not really with these films. So that's why this film slows way down with the human stuff. It's unlikable characters doing not very interesting and cliche and unfunny things for quite a while. I suppose I should talk about the rest of the cast. Megan Fox in Transformers, I know it's beating a dead horse, so I'll just say this. I'm not gonna sit here and rant about how she's the worst actress and or person ever, like some people have done, because I'm sure she might be a lovely person in real life, and these movies are the only ones I've seen her in. So I don't know if she's an awful actress or anything. In these movies though, yeah, she's really bad. There's no getting around it. I don't know if it was the writing or the director, but she's not good in this, and I'll leave it at that. Okay, I might come back to it briefly later. John Turturro, I think, is another Shia LaBeouf type thing, where not a bad actor necessarily, just not a well-written character. And everyone else, yeah, they're not great, but they're mostly fine. There are some other things I didn't like as well. Some of the military stuff can be very generic and cliche at times. The Michael Bay style, for the most part, I think actually works this time around, but at points it's very noticeable and kind of hilariously overdramatic, like how the camera's always spinning and there's overdramatic music over scenes that don't necessarily need it. There's loads of product placement, but really I don't have a problem with that. The main other thing is that besides the dialogue and characters, the rest of the writing, for example the plot, is not great. There are tons of plot holes, really dumb moments, like no one noticing this little transformer that infiltrates Air Force One, or how the government just gives top secret alien info to Sam and Michaela, or how they kill Megatron, or so on and so on. Also, Sam should be dead like a million times over in this film, but hey, that's about it. I've got to save a lot of breath for these next 4. Also, this is totally a nitpick and not anything against the film itself really, but a lot of the names in this I found kind of hilarious. And that's definitely because I've never been a big fan of Transformers, and heard these names a lot. So hearing these over-the-top names like Bone Crusher and Ironhide was just sort of amusing, and gave me quite a bit of perspective. This is how a lot of people who don't follow, like the MCU films for example, must feel when they hear about Captain America or Ant-Man for the first time.
Is it too late to change the name?
Overall, Transformers is an okay film. I've got no nostalgia for it, so just from an outsider perspective, yeah, it's alright. Of these 5 films, it's the only one I think I would ever consider rewatching, maybe. There's some fun action and good effects, and despite quite a bit of bad acting, and a lot of really bad writing, it's not totally unbearable and borderline unwatchable, like some stuff we'll get into. It's got some entertainment value, and I can totally understand why a lot of people actually really like this film. For me though, it's not great. I'll give Transformers a 6.2 out of 10. So then, because of how successful the first film was, of course a sequel was greenlit. However, this one had even more against it during production, as it was made during the writer's strike, the same strike that affected films like Quantum of Solace and X-Men Origins Wolverine. So the first film wasn't particularly well written, this one had even more stacked against it. Now I feel like these Transformers movies might be like the Star Wars prequels, in the sense that most people don't think they're good, but now a whole generation actually grew up with them and love them. So again, not trying to be mean to your childhood here, but this movie is god-awful. It's so bad. Let's think positive though first. Stay positive. Anything good here? The Optimus Prime voice is still good. The visual effects mostly are still pretty top-notch. The transforming effect isn't as impressive as the first time around though. Not just because the magic of seeing it for the first time is gone, but also quite a few times it's filmed weirdly too close. And that's really everything I liked. I mean, Josh Duhamel's pretty alright. There might be a few more things sprinkled in as we go, but that's more or less it. I'm writing this video and I just have 10 pages of notes for the negatives, so let's see if I can compress this a bit. First off, the cast and characters in this. Shia LaBeouf is back, and again, I don't think he's really that bad performance-wise. I still don't like his character at all though. He's also incredibly annoying when he's drugged out on the Allspark, or whatever that is. Then there's Megan Fox, and I know I said I'd leave it at that with her performance, but yeah, she's bad in this again. Like, apparently she's good in other stuff, so maybe it's because her and Michael Bay didn't really get along, and maybe that's why she just didn't put effort into her performance. I don't know. You might wonder why I'm trying to be so nice to Megan Fox here. It's just I've seen so many videos of people saying some really horrible things about her here, so I don't want to contribute to that. Anyway, point is, she's not good.
So, this is all part of your elaborate plan to keep me interested? I'm so sorry about your eye.
Also, the way in which her character is introduced is hilarious. It's almost like the movie is a parody of itself. Sam and Michaela's relationship is also a big part of this film, which is fun since they have zero chemistry.
Ladies first.
Okay, so tonight you're gonna be a gentleman. You're really chivalrous.
Why are you mad at me?
There's a forced love triangle between Sam, Michaela, and the Decepticon girl, which isn't particularly interesting since I don't care about those characters or their relationship. Also, going back to Sam being unlikable, he does actually kiss the Decepticon girl. I mean, it's brief and I guess a little vague as to if he was cool with it, but to me it looks very much like he just gave in and was like, yeah, right, and cheated on his girlfriend. It's unsurprising for his character, but then the movie continues to go on wanting me to root for Sam and his relationship. And it's like, how am I supposed to root for this guy? Or again, this relationship. The girl Decepticon also doesn't kill Sam immediately when she totally could. Also, after doing some very public transformering, I don't know really why she turns back into a human woman again. And look, I know these are minor nitpicks, but that's the thing about bad films. I wouldn't really notice this stuff if the movie on the whole was better. A lot of, if not all of my favorite films have big plot holes or logic flaws, but I don't notice them because I'm having so much fun, or I'm so invested, or I might give it more of a pass. But here, there's nothing else for me to really do, because I'm not entertained or having fun, so I just notice this stuff more. A recent example could be Mission Impossible 6. That film does have some really dumb, unbelievable moments in it, but the rest of the film is so good that it didn't really bother me. Something else about the characters that I really don't like in these films is how no one acts like a normal person, especially Sam. And I get in fantasy films, people aren't going to be like everyday people all the time. It is a movie, after all. But a lot of the time, people just don't feel real, and Sam's supposed to be like a real-world character, our view into this crazy world. It also takes any possible tension out of most scenes, like when Sam's about to get tortured at one point, and he's like trying to be funny, and I don't get if I'm supposed to feel anything here. Am I supposed to be scared? Amused? I don't know. In this film, they also introduced the roommate, Leo, I believe is his name, and the banter between Sam and Leo is pretty awful. It's just another thing that feels sort of like a time waster. He is a really annoying character, and at one point someone actually tases him to get him to shut up, which I enjoyed because he shut up, but it's also almost more frustrating because it shows Michael Bay knows he's incredibly annoying, and yet he still subjects us to him anyway.
Can't take that guy anymore.
The writing is bad, not just plot-wise, which we'll get into, but just lines in general.
You gotta wonder. God made us in his image. Who made him?
There's also some totally generic evil villain dialogue, which is always great.
Revenge is mine.
Also emotionally, the movie's got nothing. Optimus dying, I felt nothing. Optimus coming back, I felt nothing. Sam dying, I felt nothing. Not just because I don't like him and the movie hadn't earned any emotion, but also because I knew he wasn't dead. And again, better films can make you forget about that sort of stuff. But this one does not. It makes all this overdramatic stuff just feel pointless. Also, Sam then going to Autobot Heaven is kind of hilarious.
With courage and with sacrifice, the virtues of a leader.
Based on these first two films, I feel like Sam is not worthy of most, if not all, of the stuff they say about him. It just feels like more lazy writing. Or I guess it's because of a lack of writing. It feels like they filmed the entire movie and then they were like, hey, the part where Sam dies and he brings Optimus back to life makes no sense. How do we bridge that? Oh, just have the dead Autobots tell him he's been brave, or whatever, and that he's earned this. In the movie, it doesn't feel earned, or like a good payoff at all. Going back to the cast, this film also gives a much larger role to Sam Witwicky's parents, because that's what everyone loved about the first film. I mean, I don't know if there's a lot to say, besides it isn't funny. They're just the laziest and most predictable jokes. Like the embarrassing parent, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Max Pilny type stuff that we've seen a million times. And that wouldn't be such a problem if they didn't spend so much time on them unnecessarily in this film. This movie is as long as Infinity War, with a fraction of the characters, and the fact that this film is dragged out to that obscene runtime by this Sam's Parents comedy stuff is insane. Overall, the pacing and structure of this film is just terrible. Again, this might have something to do with that writer's strike, but scenes go on for way too long, like jokes just keep going, and then action scenes start, and are maybe kinda cool, and then just keep going until they get boring. It also feels disjointed. Like it cuts between this comparatively interesting story about Autobots and Transformers, to then this Sam and college stuff. It doesn't feel like a movie at points. Scenes just sort of happen and then stop. A lot of the story feels like there was no thought put into it. Like for example, the way in which the plot kicks off in the kitchen. It's rare that I'm this confused by both a movie's structure and also by how a lot of the stuff made it into the movie. There's no flow to these plot lines, they're just being smashed together until they eventually cross over, which takes too long. Like the Sam in college stuff goes on for way too long, way past establishing where the character is now and what he's doing and how he has that Transformer knowledge in his brain. I guess the rest is supposed to be comedic, but it wasn't really funny to me, so it just added nothing except for minutes onto the runtime. The human stuff initially in this film just brings it to a screeching halt. The movie on the whole I don't think has a single joke that lands. For an example, see this scene, or 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 this scene.
I am directly below. Enemy scrotum.
I swear this is true. There was a point where I was thinking, alright, this might be the climax of the film. I feel like I've been here for about 2.5 hours, and I looked at how long I've been watching, and it was only an hour in. I am not kidding. That's how bad the pacing is in this film, and also testament to how grueling it all is. The tones just aren't really compatible. Going from this college scene directly to the Decepticons launching, it feels like they're from totally different films. And neither one is great, but one is slightly more interesting than the other. The only thing I got any slight enjoyment out of in that whole college storyline was Bumblebee messing with the Decepticon girl. And that's not even good. It's just something at the very least interesting finally happening. I know I've complained a lot about the plot already, but there's just so much wrong with it. There's so many contrived moments and plot devices, there's a ton of lazy exposition where characters just say what's going on. I really dislike that in movies. And I know that sometimes you just have to have a scene where characters tell each other stuff, it's inevitable, at least in a lot of big blockbusters. But when a movie makes so little effort to follow the show don't tell rule, it's just frustrating. Not only from Optimus, but also that old man Transformer, just all exposition. Also, I could talk about all the dumb moments in this, but just one of the most egregious examples is when they find this secret passageway through the most contrived fight between the two worst characters in the film. It's the dumbest way they could have progressed the plot. Not through characters being even slightly intelligent or thinking for 2 seconds, just coincidentally these two throwing each other into a wall over an argument that again, was really contrived. As far as the Transformers go, they're starting to slip more into that mode where they're harder and harder to tell apart, especially the Decepticons. Like, besides Optimus and Bumblebee, their designs sometimes are more generic and gray, and in the crazy camera spinning action, yeah, it can get very confusing. This film also introduces Mudflap and Skids, who I'll be honest, I totally forgot were a thing before I rewatched this. And then they showed up and started doing just all of this, and I was like, oh no. I was just sitting there watching this in awe of how this got past however many people have to sign off on these things. This movie is also very Michael Bay. It has not only his style and type of camera work, but also his cliches. Like how loud it is, and there are constant explosions, and everything's grimy. It's like Michael Bay trying to parody himself at points. Things just blow up for no reason. Like really? Did she have to shoot those bookcases? Terrible aim for a space robot, by the way. Also, speaking of things being very Michael Bay, of course the Decepticon reveal had to come from this angle. Of course it did. The action I've mentioned, which is really the only thing that can make this somewhat more entertaining. And you know what? There are some pretty cool moments, I will admit. But it's surprisingly bad for the most part, considering that that's like the biggest reason most people go to these films. A lot of it is hard to follow, too dark, too close-up, and too shaky. For example, the opening scene. A lot just ends up being jagged chunks of metal rubbing against each other. Some is just totally incomprehensible. The really badass moments, for example with Optimus, I don't really feel anything. And even the moments that do have good effects or cool shots, it's all wasted because I don't care about anyone involved. The action is wrapped around people who I am totally indifferent towards, or genuinely don't like. Like there's a part where Leo and John Turturro team up, and I'm actively rooting for a Decepticon to just step on them. The finale also goes on for way too long, it starts to get boring and repetitive. Just slow-mo and explosions and more slow-mo and explosions, and you don't care about anyone, and it goes on seemingly endlessly. Less would be more in this instance, definitely. All this could be spectacular if they just had a little restraint, and pulled off most everything else in the film better. They bring Sam's parents in, which added no emotion for me. Optimus becomes Super Optimus, which probably has a real name. And the way Optimus kills the bad guy is kinda cool, by cutting its face off and pulling out its heart. These movies do have some pretty decent villain kills, but it's also sort of anticlimactic. Like after all this battle, it takes about 1 minute to actually defeat the bad guy once Optimus gets the new gear. This is what I'm talking about. There's no proper progression of the battle. It's just craziness, 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 and it's done. Sort of like John Wick 1, minus everything that made that film awesome. The movie just sort of ends. The pacing is terrible. It just sort of abruptly stops with no proper resolution really, or falling action. Oh well, I was mostly just happy that it was actually done. Now finally, just some miscellaneous little things that I noticed that again, aren't major complaints, and I might not notice in a better film. They're just sort of the sprinkles on top of an already terrible ice cream. There are infamously shots reused in this film, There are some kinda cool ideas with this concept of Transformers, like the dog that vomits up nanobot kind of things. That's sort of a neat idea. It's just a shame it's not used for anything particularly interesting. Sam's weird Allspark seizure isn't funny, but it's probably the funniest thing in the film. Wait, I take everything I've said about this back. The man himself, Dwight Schrute, is in it. 10 out of 10. Best movie ever.
Marilyn Monroe, Ryan started the fire!
Jokes aside, Rainn Wilson isn't great in this, but I guess personally I enjoyed that college stuff more than the rest of the film, just because it did have Dwight in it. Even though it's still incredibly dumb, and again doesn't feel remotely anything like the real world, Rainn Wilson does have one of the only lines in the film that intentionally made me smile.
Anyone else care to have some sort of mental breakdown?
Shia LaBeouf does his trademark scream, and really, a lot of the characters spend most of the film just constantly screaming. I know I mentioned this before, but this happens. Just feel like that should be pointed out again. And I will say, Sam's one good moment in the film is when he says, "Stop complaining." That might be the best moment in all these Transformers films, because it's a character successfully telling another incredibly annoying character to just shut up. Overall, this isn't news to anyone, but Transformers 2 is a really terrible film. Unlike the first, it's not really even entertaining. The Transformers stuff, the human stuff, it's more just annoying to watch. I don't think I'd ever watch this if I didn't have to for this video. It takes the best elements of the first film and does them worse, and takes the worst elements of the first film and brings them more to the forefront. I'll give Transformers Revenge of the Fallen a 3.5 out of 10. So then came the conclusion to the Sam Witwicky trilogy, Transformers 3, Dark of the Moon. This review, I imagine, will be significantly shorter than the last one, because you can pretty much take everything I said about the last film in the more general section and apply it to this. Sam is still very unlikable, he gets some extra hateable moments this time around.
Easy, sir. This is Health and Human Services.
Right, packing M4s? What are you protecting? Colostomy bags, bedpans, throat lozenges? Where'd you get that hat from? Nursing school? So you're nurses and foot powder protectors. Fantastic, yes.
The jokes are still bad, and the movie isn't funny. The movie's too long and spends too much time on uninteresting subplots. There's still a lot of really badly crammed in exposition.
So majestic and peaceful, this planet. Unlike the final days of Cybertron.
They're spreading hundreds of pillars around the globe right now. In just a few hours, they're going to launch them into orbit and bring Cybertron into our atmosphere.
Sam's parents are there still, and they're still just annoying.
No, I think it's darling. It reminds me a lot of Bumblebee. If Bumblebee were a sad piece of shit.
There's also very little flow to this film. The Autobot world and the human world for the first quarter are totally disjointed, and the cuts between them are jarring. These scenes feel like they could just be rearranged and the movie wouldn't really be different. There are still some decent action moments and good transforming effects, although once again, the Decepticons in particular are hard to tell apart at points. And again, like the last one, considering how long the film is and how long certain scenes go on, it just sort of ends. Just abruptly. It's kind of bizarre. My point is, by saying all of that, these films can really start to blend together. Even if they were good, from general plots to small action moments, these movies, especially 2 and 3, very easily can just mix together. So now that that's all out of the way, that's all true, I had to sit through all of that, let's talk what's specific to this film. I like the opening scene, it's got some good visuals, and it's actually kind of interesting and engaging. This alternate take on the moon landing. It's not amazing or anything, but after sitting through 2 of these, a scene with no dumb humor, bad characters, or incomprehensible action, it was pretty nice to see. Let's just not talk about weird CGI JFK. However, immediately after that title card, the first thing we see is this, because of course it is. It's kind of like Michael Bay saying, hey, you like that opening, and you think this movie might be different? Nope, this is my movie, I'm back, random ass shot, here you go. It's like if Infinity War opened with that awesome opening scene, and then the opening title came on, and then just this. So I guess this is a transition to talk about the new love interest character. Megan Fox is out, because she said Michael Bay is like Hitler on set, or something like that. Point is, probably not something you should say about your director. So Michaela, whatever her last name was, is out from the franchise. Which, I mean, I get why they fired her, and there's not much else they could do, but it's sort of funny how obvious it was that this was a behind-the-scenes decision, and not a plot one. Because the last film, they made such a big deal out of her character being like the one for Sam, and building up to Sam saying, I love you to her. I don't think she was a good character, but it was obvious they wanted her to end up with Sam. So if you had no idea about this behind-the-scenes drama, and were just watching these movies in a row, this would be the most confusing narrative turn. Anyway, that's not a big problem or anything, just something I found amusing. As far as the new girl, she's on about the same level of acting as Megan Fox. She's not horrible, she's not good either. Her character, much like the others in the series, is thoroughly unlikable and not very well written. Also, I guess her and Sam have a little more chemistry than Sam and Michaela. Maybe. There's still some really bad romantic dialogue, though.
I'm just your American boy toy.
I love a boy toy.
Josh Duhamel, I feel like I should point out because I keep saying I like him. He's not an amazing character or anything. As you can tell, I can't even remember his name. But he's like the one somewhat likable guy in these films, so I instantly just enjoy him more. There's a scene in this movie where 3 characters are in a room, and I just realized, how is it I don't like any of these main characters? For the record, I know someone will say, oh, sometimes main characters aren't meant to be likable. That makes it more complex or whatever. No. Here, these characters are supposed to be the ones you root for. Absolutely. Tyrese Gibson, I haven't really mentioned so far with these films. I think he's alright, although he does have some moments of less than amazing acting.
Because that asshole killed my friends, too.
This film also introduces quite a lot of new characters. There's the John Malkovich boss character, who is just horrible. Not Malkovich himself necessarily, but his jokes are terrible, and I was just genuinely not enjoying watching it when he was on. You can have horrible, unlikable human beings for characters and still have it be incredibly captivating and interesting. But this was not that. Normally, these movies should have some level of at least some form of entertainment, but his scenes did not have any of that. And then, maybe the most annoying character in all these Transformers films. Possibly. That is a tough contest to win. But it's Ken Jeong, who can be a very funny actor. I know, these movies get some pretty talented actors sometimes and just completely waste them. I like Ken Jeong, but in this film, his character is the most irritating character I've seen in a long time. The movie doesn't make his character or plot interesting, I'm not invested or engaged in it, it's not funny, it's just annoying. Okay, thinking back to that scene with Leo from Transformers 2, I realize maybe he's not the most annoying character, but he's definitely up there. Just another total waste of a good actor. I should not be happy when a character is killed off because it means he won't be giving me a headache anymore, but here we are. Patrick Dempsey is also introduced here, and he's okay. The whole thing between him and Shia LaBeouf isn't particularly funny, just because of the writing, but on the whole, I guess my standard for characters I like in this franchise has been lowered to, do they give me a headache, or are they a terrible person the movie wants me to like? And he's neither of those, so I guess I liked him more than the others. Once he's revealed to be a villain though, and he really has to villain it up, yeah, that's not great.
Yes, he will. They all do.
And you slapped like a girl.
And finally, Alan Tudyk appears in this film. Once again, great, really funny actor, not really given anything that funny to do. As far as the new Transformers introduced, Sentinel Prime is okay, I guess. He's more interesting than most of the other stuff going on. I've talked about the story, and again, it's pretty much the same quality-wise as Transformers 2, if not slightly more comprehensible, because no writer's strike at the time of this one. But still, it doesn't feel like anyone really cared plot-wise. At this point, this is very formulaic and very predictable. This premise has so much potential. You could do so much with it, and it even has a director who has talent. But that's wasted on long stretches of just nothingness in these films. It takes about 40 minutes for this movie to really pick up. I will say, the second half of the film is better than the first, barely, just in the sense that it's more interesting. The Dempsey plot actually ties into the main story somewhat organically, which I guess is a step up from the other subplots in this franchise. There are some weird trailer-like Suicide Squad-esque editing moments though. Also, the fact that the day is saved in the end in this way is pretty frustrating. Megatron would never fall for this kind of thing. But even if he was going to, it definitely wouldn't be from this speech. Action-wise, I do think this is better than Revenge of the Fallen. There are some really cool moments, especially involving slow-mo, although this one in particular is ruined by a Shia LaBeouf scream right afterwards. But yeah, there is some cool stuff here. There are also cool ideas for action pieces with some decent execution. Like, that wingsuit jump is actually quite good, and the building collapse, initially, is pretty great. As it progresses, it starts to devolve into the same kind of stuff, but overall, that scene and the idea for that tentacle transformer, not bad at all. That being said, that final battle scene, again, goes for seemingly a million years. In that respect, I think it's actually worse than Revenge of the Fallen. There are some interesting moments, but it just goes back to that slow-mo and explosions and Michael Bay stuff that goes on for way too long. Again, there's no, natural progression of the action. A good comparison, I'd say, would be Infinity War versus Age of Ultron. Infinity War's climax has action that progresses and changes and has unique moments and slowly builds up as it goes, so it doesn't get boring and start to feel just mindless, while Age of Ultron feels less well-paced in terms of its action climax. Now, I think Age of Ultron is a million times better than Transformers 3, but I hope you get the point I'm making. I shouldn't be bored watching all this crazy spectacle, but I am, unlike other crazy spectacles that I'm actually invested in. The action also has a lot of other problems that keep it from being truly great, like how I don't care about these characters. There's sometimes some not so great rubbery human body CGI. There's the fact that characters should be dead many times over for just so many reasons. And also how the Decepticons don't just kill Sam immediately. This has a bit of that Terminator 4 syndrome, where these killer machines could easily just kill a human at any time, but they don't, for seemingly no good reason. Also, we get a 2010 Skybeam here, yay, just the cherry on top. Back to something mildly positive, I mentioned this before, but I do enjoy the kills in these movies. They can be somewhat cool and brutal sometimes, which I wasn't really expecting from these movies, and is one of the more interesting and less boring aspects of the action. Like, Optimus Prime is just a cold-blooded killer. Like, if these were people, this would be some incredibly brutal stuff. There's other minor stuff, Megatron wearing a cloak for no reason, some bad song choices that don't fit the scene, Bill O'Reilly's existence and appearance in this film, and also the fact that no one hears or figures out that this incredibly obvious Decepticon watch is a Decepticon, especially since they're highly trained agents and or Autobots. But hey, you get it by now. Overall, Transformers 3 is really bad. However, it's not as bad as 2. Here at least, there's scenes and moments that I can point to that are actually kinda good, even if the film overall has a lot of the same problems as the last one. It's a step up only in the sense that this franchise was in a ditch quality-wise, and it crawled 1 or 2 inches out of that ditch. Still not good. I'll give Transformers Dark of the Moon a 4.2 out of 10. So at this point, people were realizing that, hey, these movies are sort of terrible, and I guess in an effort to get people back on board, the studio went forward with a soft reboot kind of thing. I mean, it's the same universe and the same Autobots, but human character-wise, it's out with Shia LaBeouf, Megan Fox, John Turturro, for now, and in with Marky Mark and his funky bunch of other actors. And I guess it worked, either due to the new cast, or the promise of Dinobots, or whatever. This movie made $1 billion. Unfortunately, they didn't really revamp the franchise quality-wise, because this film is just as bad as the others. It's not as bad as 2, but it's on about the same level as 3. The thing is, the Shia LaBeouf character doesn't really get his Into the Sunset end moment, which is fine for me, but again, if I was a big fan of these, it's like the Megan Fox thing. It's very weird narratively, to just move on. I guess we assume he got married to that woman in the end, and I'm happy to move on from him, but from a story perspective, it doesn't really feel right. It very much just feels like a corporate decision behind the camera. Okay, does Mark Wahlberg make for a better lead than Shia LaBeouf? Not really.
Oh, there you go. Now hold it. Stop shaking!
I mean, he's not worse, and he's probably more bearable and less annoying than Shia LaBeouf. Wahlberg's a good actor, but here, I don't particularly like him.
Ooh, Jerry? You bring his big ass up here, he's gonna be huffing and puffing before he can squeeze out of that car. You back out on my grass, you're gonna be in big trouble. You tell Jerry to come see me. I'll give him some pecan pie.
He's not particularly interesting, and towards the end, he sort of starts to become that classic Transformers character of a screaming idiot. Also, they beat you over the head in the first 15 minutes and really the rest of the film with the fact that he's an inventor, which starts to get kinda funny. Kelsey Grammer is fine, it feels a bit phoned in, and Stanley Tucci is maybe the best part of this film, simply by being Stanley Tucci. I love Stanley Tucci, and even in bad films, he's usually alright. So here, no, he's not great, and his dialogue isn't good. But I enjoyed seeing him, and he seemed to be having fun, and he's charismatic, although sometimes he also just becomes a screaming lunatic. He is incredibly unlikable, but unlike a lot of the other unlikable characters in this series, he's actually meant to be, and since he has some level of charisma, I enjoyed him on that level. That being said, he does still have scenes that go on for way too long. Also, TJ Miller's character is bad in this, just straight up, not funny, annoying, and once again, I was weirdly, genuinely relieved when his character was killed. That Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. scientist guy who created Ada, he's good on that, he's not good here. And then there's Mark Wahlberg's underage daughter and her Irish boyfriend. The writing and performance from the girl isn't good. In fact, I think she's actually worse than the previous two.
Who taught you how to cook without ketchup or balance your checkbook? Who always has to be the grown-up around here?
Again, I don't really want to blame the actors, because the writing and their characters are pretty awful already, but at some point, a good performance can make even some really dumb lines sound fine. I think a good example is Taron Egerton as Eggsy in Kingsman and Kingsman 2. He has some really cheesy dumb lines, especially in the second one, but he actually sells it pretty well. This character is also not good, and often makes incredibly stupid and frustrating decisions that no one would actually make. And the guy is fine. He's not great, but he's not noticeably more awful than anyone else around him. The thing that I find kind of hilarious about all this is the whole underage aspect, that they keep going on and on about, to the point where it gets really weird. Like in the previous films, there's obviously a lot of the female characters being objectified. Here, there's more of that, but here, they make her specifically underage. It's so specific and takes up so much more screen time than it should for something that is already kinda weird. It might be the only somewhat entertaining part of the film because of how bizarre it is. Like they mention quite a few times that she's 17 and you're like, okay, I got it. You can stop mentioning it. But then, at a point, the film just stops for more of this, where the boyfriend pulls out a card in his wallet to show Mark Wahlberg that he can legally bang his daughter. And it's just so bad that it's great. It's funny, but not in the way the movie wants it to be. But anyway, besides the occasional laughs from the absurdity and or stupidity of it, this whole plotline just serves to make this runtime as ungodly long as it is. I guess it's supposed to be funny, or a character arc for Wahlberg coming around to this guy, but by the end, when he finally accepts him, and he's like, you know what, you're alright, even though you've mostly just been talking about banging my daughter this whole time. It doesn't feel earned or natural at all. So yeah, as per usual, the human conflict is neither interesting nor funny, or filled with characters that act like normal people or are interesting, and many of these scenes seem like they could have been easily cut out. On the Transformers end of things, in some ways this is better, and in some ways this is worse. On the plus side, the idea of the villain is kind of fun, the gun face thing. On a purely, oh, that's kind of a cool robot level, yeah, it's a decent villain. And they actually finally distinguished the Autobots, which is nice. Now I can actually tell them apart, both visually, and they all have personalities, kind of. There's Optimus, there's Bumblebee, there's the Samurai one, the John Goodman one, and the other one. So that's at least a step up. Plus, the movie is pretty colorful and somewhat nice to look at points, which can't be said for parts of the other films. However, the Transformers as characters suck. Putting aside the fact that they're intelligent robot alien warrior soldiers and should act like that, shouldn't they at the very least act like adults? Just some of the time? Like you can have one more childish one, I guess, but they all act like children. There's scenes where the movie just stops, so the Transformers can sort of bicker and punch each other for a bit. It doesn't really add anything. And there are points where even Optimus, who I was under the impression was supposed to be a fearless leader type character, like this team's Captain America, sort of, just loses it over one of his friends, who he already knew was dead, and runs in like an idiot. Also, this is a small moment, but there's a part where the John Goodman one just does this.
Take that, bitch. Oh, you're dead.
Am I supposed to like him? Was that supposed to be funny? I honestly don't know. Also, there's a very random Cassim G cameo in this film, which I guess is cool.
Cassim. Oh.
Okay, look, I'm kind of upset about this, cause no joke, I have a page and a half of notes here on story and dialogue in this film, with timestamps to examples of what I want to talk about, but really, I'm gonna have to skip over most of it, cause I don't want this to get boring, cause it's the same problems as the other films that I've already talked about so much, so I don't want to just repeat myself. It's just a shame, cause I actually bothered to note down the times of different examples I want to talk about with dumb jokes.
Any thought you have, I own it, so basically, I own you.
I don't think you can own someone. That was like a while ago, even in Texas. Su casa es mi casa. We're gonna lose the casa.
Swear to God, I am one diaper change away from poisoning his oatmeal. My face is my warrant.
What did you touch?
I told you, homeboy. You can't touch this.
Or bad exposition.
2 more weeks, girls, till no more classes ever.
Or whatever. But I don't want to be just a broken record. I guess that's a point in itself, though. This film seemed to be sort of promising a new start to the Transformers films.
A new era has begun.
But nope, it's just the same stuff, and I guess we should have known since it's still Michael Bay. That's why I actually, maybe foolishly, have faith in Bumblebee, because it's the first one that's not Michael Bay. The few things I can say about this film specifically, it's a little bit better paced than the last two. Like, it's still way too long, but at least it doesn't take like 40 minutes for the plot to properly kick off. The fact that the metal the Transformers are made from is called Transformium, just, ugh. And I will say, same problem with my notes for action and special effects. It's the same thing now, really. Pretty good action and effects for most of it, but the action goes on for too long, and the finale becomes boring, and yada yada. But something weird about this film is that, as bad as the others are, the special effects usually weren't a negative, and there were very few bad ones. Here, however, there are actually quite a few moments where the special effects are god-awful. Like as phoned in as the script might be, you can tell a lot of effort went into a lot of these effects, namely the Transformers themselves. So I don't know if it was a time issue or something like that, but sometimes this looks terrible. I mean, it doesn't start great, these dinosaurs don't look amazing, but then the Transformium just looks horrible. It's a cool concept, but I don't understand how, with this big a budget, and clearly this talented a special effects team, it looks this bad. Again, I'm guessing time. And then there are also shots like this, and this, and this, that are way below what these films have been before special effects wise. Also in terms of action, not only is the hand-to-hand stuff not great, but something that I haven't really mentioned with these movies so far, but it applies to all of them, is that they all have the wouldn't it be cool if blank problem, which for example Zack Snyder's films sometimes have, where it doesn't really serve the story or characters in any way, but wouldn't it be cool if this happened, and so it's just sort of in there. I also haven't really mentioned a big thing a lot of people talk about with Transformers, which is the product placement. And the reason for that is, over the years, I've realized I don't really have a problem with product placement at all. A lot of the time, I don't even notice it, and when I do, it doesn't make me angry or take me out of the film that much. If anything, it just makes the world feel like the real world. I mean, they have to drive some brand of car, right? But when the product placement is just blindingly obvious, and not written in a just slightly clever or subtle way, like the Beats thing in here, yeah, it takes me out of it, and I'm gonna point it out. Like, you couldn't have come up with any other slightly more natural way to integrate that into this film. Also, one of the funniest lines in this is when they're looking at the Transformer being rebuilt, and someone goes, "Why does he keep looking like Megatron?" These genius scientists who want to build a thing that looks like Optimus don't get just slightly suspicious when it keeps continuously turning into Megatron. Tucci or someone's like, "Oh yeah, it just has some kinks in the system, whatever," which is just the most hilariously lazy way they could have written that. There's also a whole big thing around this film about how it panders to China and Chinese audiences, which I mean, yeah, I can see that. Personally though, sort of like product placement, that doesn't really bother me, at least in the films I've seen. Like, the movie has to be set somewhere, and the fact that it ends up being China, business motivated or not, doesn't really ruin the movie. A lot of other things ruin the movie. The fact that it panders to Chinese audiences doesn't, for me. I mean, if it tore apart the movie's story and characters just for the sake of that, then yeah, that would be a problem. But this movie's story and characters were already so terrible that it doesn't really do that. The fact that it's trying to sell to a Chinese audience is not what ruins this film. And finally, the Dinobots, who I totally forgot were in this. If you came to this movie for that, I'm sorry. They show up in the last 30 minutes and are just kind of there. I mean, they're kind of cool, I guess. Again, in the most basic sense of Optimus Prime riding a dinosaur is kind of a fun visual, but in any other story way, no. And they're in a small fraction of a very long film, so again, I'm sorry if you came here for that. So overall, Transformers 4 is just bad again. People thought the franchise might pull through, but nope. It's a movie with the same problems as the last one. There are improvements here and there, but there are also things that are worse here and there. And it's another one that I don't ever want to have to watch again. I'll give Transformers Age of Extinction a 4 out of 10. And now, finally, at long last, Transformers 5, The Last Night. The last Michael Bay Transformers film. Hopefully. You know what I said earlier about all my notes going to waste? Yeah, same here. 10 pages of notes and time codes that are totally unnecessary, because I don't want to bore you and say the same stuff. So all the bad stuff I said about the last 4 films, especially the last one in particular, yep, it all applies here. I think that's why I hate this film in particular, and also why I think it didn't make nearly as much money as the last 2. It's just the same garbage, and at this point, people are wise to it. In the other films, at least there are sort of things to talk about, like the underage daughter weirdness, or Shia LaBeouf being an idiot, or how stupid the plot for the second one is. But here, there's just nothing. It's just bad, unfunny, everything wrong with the last movies again, with nothing really interesting attached to it. The last note I wrote for this was, I could have reviewed this without even seeing it, which is why it just feels like such a waste of time to me. It's definitely not the worst Transformers film, but it's probably the one I enjoyed watching the least, just cause it's the same thing. Again. So, the few last night specific things I have to say. This movie has a constantly changing aspect ratio, which is kind of annoying and distracting, and not just like one scene to another, like shot to shot. It totally breaks the flow of a scene, and if you were invested, takes you out of it. And also really draws attention to the editing in the action scenes, which is something these films really shouldn't do. The film also has several scenes set in the past, for example in medieval England and in World War II, and while those scenes aren't necessarily good, I think it's an interesting idea. If we could have Transformers in different time periods of history, sort of Assassin's Creed style, that could be really cool. That's also exactly what I think they should do with the Terminator films. Mr. Sunday has a great video on that. Look, the movie does have cool concepts in it, mostly action and design-wise, like Bumblebee being shot into little pieces, and a literal slow-mo gun. Don't know the logic behind it, but it's a fun idea. The movie never does anything super creative with either of them though. It never exploits the full potential that comes with these ideas. Then, as far as the new cast members, Anthony Hopkins is in this. Hopkins does 3 things in this movie, really. 1, deliver lines that sound like they could have been pulled directly from one of the Thor films.
Magic does exist. It was found long ago.
2, do or say inappropriate things that I guess are supposed to be funny. And 3, deliver exposition.
12 guardian knights combined into a mighty dragon to protect it.
Like, I know other movies have this sort of thing too, like Guardians, for example, but those are the weaker parts of those films, and at least they make it more interesting or funny. Also, he gets to deliver this line.
Yes, but you want to know, don't you, dude?
They added some child actors to this, and funnily enough, of these 4, this girl might actually give the best performance. That's not saying much, though.
Wake up, look at me! Wake up, can it be? I'm not leaving you!
Mark Wahlberg's back, and when he showed up, it made me burst out laughing. That really speaks to the quality of the last film. That I'm not cheering when the hero shows up, it's unintentionally hilarious. There is a romance in this film between Cade and the British woman, whose name I can't remember, which, as you'd expect, is bad. I mean, the fact that the girl falls for this guy doesn't feel natural at all. It's just because the script says so.
Qualities of a knight, purity of heart, valor, honor, virtue, integrity.
Yeah, Cade has none of those qualities. They don't have any chemistry. In fact, the woman seems to hate Wahlberg for most of the film, and then starts to come around to him once she sees him shirtless, which is just a beautifully written love story right there. And also, they share the least romantic cinematic kiss since Finn and Rose in The Last Jedi, which is actually a movie I like a lot, and whoops, now all the comments are about The Last Jedi. Tucci's back, this time as a different character, Merlin, and he's bad, even though I really like Tucci. Also, I thought because they cast him as Merlin in the past, it was going to turn out that Tucci in the present day was going to be that last descendant of Merlin, but nope, present day Tucci does not appear. I guess a selling point behind this was that they tied it back into the original 3 films. John Turturro comes back, which I thought might be fun, but as soon as he was on screen, I was like, oh no, this character is still the worst. They also got him to say scrotum again, twice.
Old kind of goat scrotum or something. Dissolving scrotum.
So good on you, Michael Bay, I guess. Josh Duhamel's back, which I liked, and as much as I hate his character, the Sam Witwicky picture cameo did admittedly make me smile. Like, remember when it was at least kind of fun to talk about how bad these were? The film has another MacGuffin in it, which just contributes to these films feeling so formulaic at this point. I want to point out real quick, a lot of movie franchises have formulas, but they add new stuff to the formula to keep it interesting. It's more of a loose framework, and then everything else inside it is creative. But then here, the places where they could be creative, they aren't. It all feels the same in terms of action and character and comedy, so it doesn't work. A good example of a trilogy with a formula working is the original Indiana Jones trilogy. The movie also has so many ripoffs in it, more than the others. There's a weird Suicide Squad montage, which is trying so hard to be cool that it hilariously ends up being not remotely cool. There's a BB-8 ripoff and a C-3PO ripoff. I don't care if they acknowledge it, they're still doing it. And the plot in the whole feels weirdly very reminiscent of parts of National Treasure. Also, I think the humor might maybe be even worse in this film, simply because the jokes aren't just bad, but they're more drawn out and painfully awkward, and like the movie really draws attention to them. So overall, Transformers 5 is the same garbage. I guess it's appropriate based on the quality of these films that these Michael Bay movies went out with a resounding eh. When this came out, no one cared about or talked about it as much as the others, cause it's not even funny anymore. It's just bad and boring and terrible. I'll give Transformers The Last Knight a 4 out of 10. So those were my thoughts on the Transformers movies. What do you think of these? Which is your favorite and least favorite? Let me know all of your thoughts down below in the comments. While you're at it, be sure to like this video, check out my Instagram and Twitter at BHL_Hudson, check out this podcast about movies and TV and whatnot I do every other week with a friend of mine. It's called The Poorly Planned Podcast, and subscribe for more videos like the one you just watched. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.